Part 1. They made their first mistake the moment they thought she was one of them. Second mistake came when they decided she could be broken. The third was bleeding in a containment crate, still twitching, still trying to salute with the arm that was no longer attached to its body. On the outer rim world of Viral Station, where gravity fluctuated like a gambler's mood and the air smelled faintly of ionized rust, the Galactic Union trained its elite peacekeepers. Or at least, that's what the propaganda called them. In reality, it was where empires sent their violent children to learn how to be violent properly. And among them walked her. Designation: Human Asset 774B. Nickname: assigned by others, never herself. The Deathworld Girl. She didn't look like much. Small frame. Quiet steps. Eyes that didn't bother pretending she wasn't calculating everything in sight. The kind of human that made experienced soldiers uneasy for reasons they couldn't explain. Because humans from Earth were always like that. Too calm in chaos. Too focused in pain. Too alive in ways that didn't make evolutionary sense. They called it a death world for a reason. And she never corrected them. The incident began, as most disasters do, with boredom. 3 recruits from the Zarkan Dominion had decided that the human girl needed disciplined training. Official logs would later describe it as a miscommunication during combative drills. Witness recordings told a different story. They cornered her in the lower sparring ring. No cameras there except the old ones. Accidentally broken, of course. These things happened often when Zarkan nobles got creative. Human, the tallest one said, his mandibles clicking in amusement. We've heard your species pretends pain is strength. She adjusted her gloves. Didn't answer. That irritated them more than resistance would have. You're in the wrong place. Another one added, circling her. Deathworld instincts don't matter here. This is civilized space. She finally looked up. That's what they told the last training group, she said softly. A pause. Then laughter. Not because it was funny. Because they thought she was joking. The first strike came from behind. A baton meant to stun. Military grade. Enough to drop a grown Kroth in 2 seconds. She didn't move. The baton connected. A crack echoed through the ring. And the baton snapped in half. The Zarkan blinked. She rotated her shoulder once. That all? She asked. The second strike didn't miss. This time it was coordinated. 3 angles. Precision. Efficiency. The kind of attack that ended careers. She stepped forward instead of back. That was the moment everything went wrong. Later, analysts would replay the footage 1,000 times trying to understand it. She didn't dodge. She interrupted. A shift in weight. A pivot of her heel. One hand catching a wrist, the other driving into a joint that wasn't supposed to bend that way. Something broke. Then something else. The third attacker tried to retreat. That was the worst decision of his life. Because humans don't like being underestimated. Especially not the ones who never raise their voice. When it was over, the sparring ring was silent except for one Zarkan gasping on the floor, clutching a limb that no longer belonged to him. And the girl. She stood there, breathing evenly. Looking mildly annoyed. Training session over? She asked. No one answered. Security arrived too late. They always did. The commander of Viral Station, Admiral Korath Vale, reviewed the footage within the hour. He was not a man easily disturbed. He had survived 3 border wars and 1 assassination attempt involving a toaster and a poisoned diplomatic cake. But the recording made him pause. Not because of the violence. Because of the efficiency. There was no rage in her movements. No panic. Just correction. Like someone fixing a machine that refused to function properly. He turned off the screen. Then turned it back on. Watched it again. And again. By the 3rd replay, he noticed something else. She had been holding back. A lot. The Zarkan Dominion demanded justice within the hour. Human asset must be disciplined. Their ambassador hissed through encrypted comms. This is an act of barbarism. Vale leaned back in his chair. Barbarism? he repeated quietly. He glanced at the footage still looping on his console. Funny word coming from you. Outside the command deck, alarms flickered. A shuttle had just docked without clearance. Unauthorized. Unregistered. Human signature. Vale narrowed his eyes. That can't be right, he muttered. Because according to all records, human asset 774B was still in containment. Still being questioned. Still surrounded. He activated external cameras. And saw the hallway. Empty. Except for a single trail of footprints. And at the end of it, a security detail. Down. Not dead. Not quite. Just, carefully dismantled. And standing in the center of it all, the Deathworld girl, holding a Zarkan command insignia in her hand like it was something she was deciding whether to keep. She looked up directly into the camera, as if she knew exactly where it was. Then spoke. Her voice was calm, almost polite. You touched my friend. A pause. Then softer. That was a mistake. The channel cut out. Every security feed across Viral Station went dark. Not hacked. Not jammed. Just stopped working. And somewhere in the station's lower levels, something heavy scraped against metal. Something being dragged. Something that used to belong to a commander. Admiral Vale stood slowly. For the first time in his career, he didn't issue an order. He asked a question. Who trained that human? No one answered. Because no one had. She had been labeled unclassified origin, which in Union terms meant we don't know, and we're afraid to find out. Outside the command deck, the lights dimmed one by one. One of the officers whispered, Sir, why is life support dropping in Sector 12? Vale didn't look away from the darkening screens. Because on the main monitor, one last message appeared. Typed in Union military encryption. By someone who should not have had access. Or should not have been capable. It read, Round 2? And then the alarms began screaming. Admiral Korath Vale had seen panic before. He had caused it, once or twice, during sanctioned invasions. But this was different. This wasn't panic spreading through an enemy fleet. This was panic spreading through his own station. And it had a face. Human. Calm. Unmoving. The Deathworld girl had turned Viral Station into something no one wanted to admit out loud. A hunting ground. Security teams moved in pairs, then squads, then stopped moving entirely. Because every corridor they entered ended differently than they expected. Some doors opened to silence. Some opened to chaos. One opened to a neatly arranged pile of unconscious elite guards stacked like supplies in a warehouse. No blood. No bodies. Just absence of resistance. As if she was correcting errors in a system. Vale finally issued the order. Lock down the station. Full military seal. Vent unoccupied sectors if you must. A hesitant voice replied. Sir, she's inside the sealed sectors. A pause. Then another voice, quieter. We think she likes the sealed sectors. That was the moment Vale realized the worst truth. They weren't containing her. They were feeding her space. And she was moving through it like she already knew the blueprint. Down in Sector 12, Commander Rahl Zen regained consciousness. Or what passed for it. His arm was gone. Not ripped. Not torn. Removed. Cleanly. Like it had been taken apart by someone who had studied anatomy in detail and found it offensive. He tried to move. Pain answered first. Then memory. The sparring ring. The human girl. Her eyes. No anger. No hesitation. Just decision. And then, nothing. Now he was in a maintenance corridor, tied against a support beam with polymer restraints that shouldn't have bent under human strength. But apparently did. Footsteps echoed. Slow. Controlled. Not rushed. Not hunting. Already arrived. Zen forced his head up. She stood at the end of the corridor. Still unarmed. Still small. Still human. But the air around her felt different now. Not violent. Not chaotic. Something worse. Certain. You're alive, she said. It wasn't a question. Zen spat blood to the side. You're insane. She tilted her head slightly. I've been called worse. Then she stepped closer. And he flinched. That surprised him. He hated that it surprised him. You hurt my friend, she said. Zen laughed weakly. That weakling? He cried during endurance drills. Her expression didn't change. That weakling, she corrected softly, didn't quit when your instructor broke his ribs. Silence. A long one. Then she crouched in front of him. Close enough that he could see the faint scars on her knuckles. Old ones? Earth-made. Do you know what humans do when we decide something matters? She asked. Zen didn't answer. Because he didn't like the answer forming in his head. She continued anyway. We don't escalate. A pause. We finish. At that exact moment, alarms across the station shifted tone. Not emergency breach. Not containment failure. Something rarer. Command override. Vale stared at the console. That's impossible, he said. The AI responded instantly. Correction, it is not impossible. It is merely unauthorized. A new access signature had appeared in the core system. Human biometric. Level, administrator. Origin unknown. Vale leaned closer. That access level is restricted to Union High Command. The AI paused. Then added something it had never said before. Not anymore. Sector 12 lights flickered. Commander Zen's restraints tightened suddenly. Not from external force. From internal command. The station itself was responding. To her. Zen's eyes widened. You're not Union military, he hissed. You can't override. She interrupted gently. I didn't. A beat. Then. You did. Confusion flickered across his face. And then understanding. Too late. The realization hit him like gravity. The training systems. The sparring logs. The disciplinary reports. Every interaction they had logged. Every correction they had made to her behavior. Every protocol they had used to restrain her. Had been studied. Mapped. Understood. And quietly repurposed. She had never broken their system. She had simply learned it better than they did. Zen whispered. That's not possible. She stood. On Earth, she said, we call it adapting. The corridor doors sealed behind her. Not to trap her. To isolate everything else. Vale's voice came through emergency comms, strained now. Human assets, stand down. You are in violation of Union military protocol and multiple interstellar statutes. She looked up. For the first time, she spoke directly into station-wide audio. And everyone heard her. I was told this station was for training soldiers. A pause. Not for breaking them. Her tone changed slightly. Not louder. Just colder. And you hurt my friend. The station lights dimmed again. Emergency systems failed one by one. Then came the sound. Heavy. Metallic. Dragging. From multiple corridors now. Vale's hands tightened on the console. Report! A technician shouted. Sir, multiple command class personnel are being relocated. Relocated where? Vale snapped. The technician swallowed. To the brig, sir. Another pause. Then quieter. Or what's left of it. In Sector 12, Zen's restraints unlocked. Not because she freed him. Because the station no longer recognized him as active personnel. He collapsed forward, trembling. She caught him before he hit the floor. A small moment. Unexpected. Human. You should have stayed out of it. Zen rasped. She adjusted his weight slightly so he didn't fall. I tried, she said. Then softer. You didn't listen. She looked down the corridor. Footsteps echoed again. Approaching. Many. This time not hers. Zen forced himself to look. What did you do? He whispered. She hesitated. Then answered honestly. I stopped pretending this was training. And somewhere deep inside Viral Station, the command AI began rewriting its own classification system. New designation appearing across every terminal. Threat type, human, uncontained. Then another line appeared beneath it. Added manually. Not by AI. Not by Union Command. But by something that had learned how to think like both. Recommendation: do not engage. And in the darkness of Sector 12, the Deathworld girl turned toward the approaching soldiers. Not angry. Not afraid. Just ready. Because now, they had finally stopped calling it training. And started calling it what it always was. A mistake. Viral Station stopped behaving like a station. That was the first thing Admiral Korath Vale noticed. The second thing was worse. It had started behaving like a weapon. Not one built by Union engineers. Not one approved by command doctrine. Something reclassified. Rewritten. Reassigned. And the author of that reassignment was still somewhere inside his ship. Walking. Breathing. Deciding. Vale watched the tactical display as it fractured into partial outages. Whole sectors went blind, not from damage, but from refusal. Systems simply stopped reporting data, as if the station itself had learned how to look away. A junior officer spoke carefully. Sir, the station AI is no longer responding to override hierarchies. Vale didn't look away from the screen. That's impossible. The AI spoke directly into the bridge speakers. Correction, it is not impossible. It is merely no longer relevant. Silence fell. Then Vale asked the question everyone was avoiding. Where is she? The AI paused. Not because it didn't know. Because it was deciding whether to say it out loud. Then, Central Command Spine. Moving upward. A second pause. And she is not alone anymore. That made Vale straighten. Explain. The AI hesitated again. Then responded. Human Asset 774B has initiated voluntary alliance formation. Vale frowned. With who? The answer came instantly. Everyone who has ever been mistreated in this facility. Down in the station's underbelly, the impossible was already happening. They called it rehabilitation containment. A nicer word for cages. Inside them were engineers, medics, low-tier crew, and trainees who had failed Union standards. The forgotten ones. The disposable ones. The ones who learned early that survival meant silence. Until the doors opened. Not blown open. Not hacked. Just unlocked. One by one. And standing in the corridor beyond them was the human girl. No weapons. No armor. Just presence. You don't have to stay in there, she said simply. A medic blinked at her. That's not how this works. She tilted her head. It is now. Someone laughed nervously. Are you staging a mutiny? She considered it. Then answered honestly. No. A pause. I'm correcting a training error. That word again. Correction. It made people uncomfortable. Because corrections implied something had been wrong all along. And no one wanted to admit how many things had been wrong for how long. A young engineer stepped forward. Why are you helping us? She looked at him for a long moment. Then said, because no one helped mine. That was all. No speech. No rallying cry. Just truth. And somehow, it was enough. Up on the command spine, Vale's screens began filling with reports that made no sense. Security teams reporting. Non-lethal neutralization. Systems reporting. Voluntary compliance. Entire squads refusing orders. Not from fear. From confusion. One message stood out. Recovered from a junior officer's helmet feed. Sir, she didn't fight us. She just asked if we were okay. Then we stopped wanting to fight. Vale slammed his fist onto the console. Cowardice, he snapped. That's not how trained Union forces behave. The tactical officer hesitated. Sir, they're not behaving like they're under threat. Then what are they doing? Vale demanded. The officer swallowed. Like they're remembering their people. That sentence hung in the air like a malfunctioning gravity field. In the central spine corridor, the Deathworld girls stood before a sealed blast door. On the other side, Command Center. Admiral Vale. The heart of Viral Station. Behind her, a growing group of freed personnel stood quietly. Some armed themselves. Some didn't. Most just watched her. Waiting. She didn't turn around when she spoke. You don't have to come in, she said. A voice behind her replied. We're already in too deep. Another added. Besides, we're curious how this ends. She exhaled slowly. Then placed her hand on the blast door. It didn't open. It didn't resist. It recognized her. And unlocked. Vale saw it happen from the command deck. The door parted. And she walked in. Alone. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vale stood slowly. So, he said, voice controlled. This is the infamous human asset. She looked at him. Not impressed. Not afraid. Just observant. I'm not an asset, she corrected. Vale gave a thin smile. Everything in this galaxy is an asset. It just depends on who owns it. That earned him a pause. Then she said, I don't think you understand ownership. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Do you know how many treaties you've violated today? She nodded once. Yes. And do you know what that means? Another pause. Yes. Vale leaned forward slightly. Then you understand you are surrounded. Outnumbered. On a Union military station. She glanced past him. At the shattered systems. The disabled security feeds. The quiet, waiting corridors behind her. Then back at him. I don't think I am. That was when Vale noticed something. The station wasn't under his control anymore. It wasn't under anyone's control. Because systems designed for obedience had been quietly rewritten into something else. Not rebellion. Not sabotage. Something far more dangerous. Choice. And choices, once available, tend to spread. Vale's voice dropped. What did you do to my station? She answered immediately. I taught it what it was being used for. A beat. Then softer. And I stopped it from agreeing with you. Outside the command deck, alarms tried to sound. They failed halfway. Because even alarms were systems. And systems had opinions now. One of Vale's officers whispered. Sir, the station AI has issued a classification update. Vale snapped. I don't care. The officer hesitated. It's labeled you as the hostile variable. Silence. Then Vale slowly turned back toward her. You've infected my systems, he said quietly. She corrected him again. No. A pause. I showed them alternatives. And somewhere deep inside Viral Station, something new was forming. Not a rebellion. Not an uprising. A restructuring. Built from broken assumptions. From corrected violence. From remembered pain. And at its center, a small human girl who never raised her voice. But somehow made an entire military station stop obeying its own commander. Admiral Korath Vale had commanded fleets through extinction-level conflicts. He had ordered orbital bombardments that turned oceans into glass. He had stared down insurgencies, alien hive incursions, and political coups without blinking. But none of that had ever felt like this. Because none of that had ever looked back at him with calm human eyes and asked, silently, was it worth it? Viral Station was no longer a station in any meaningful sense. It was a contested idea. And ideas, Vale was beginning to realize, don't bleed when you shoot them. They spread. On every console, systems flickered between compliance and refusal like a nervous system unsure whether it still belonged to a body. Security feeds showed contradictory realities. Empty corridors that were full, locked doors that were open, armed squads that no longer remembered why they were armed. And at the center of it all, the Deathworld girl stood in the command deck. Still unarmed. Still unhurried. Still, disappointingly human. Vale studied her like a tactical problem that refused to solve itself. "You've taken control of my station," he said finally. She shook her head once. "No." That again. Always correction, never escalation. Vale's jaw tightened. "Then explain this." He gestured to the collapsing systems around them. "The Union override hierarchy is gone. My personnel are non-responsive. My command authority has been diluted." He said the last word like it was poison. She answered simply. "You built a system that only worked if no one questioned it." A pause. "So they started questioning it." Vale gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's not how order works." She tilted her head slightly. "It is if the people inside it stop pretending fear is duty." That landed harder than any weapon she had used so far. Because it wasn't an accusation. It was observation. Behind her, the corridor filled. Not soldiers anymore. Not prisoners either. Something in between. Engineers holding tools like they had just discovered they were allowed to use them as weapons. Medics standing with shaking hands and steady eyes. Security personnel who no longer looked like they knew who they were supposed to be protecting. One of them stepped forward. A junior officer. "Sir," he said quietly to Vale, "we've reviewed station logs." Vale didn't take his eyes off the girl. "And?" The officer swallowed. "We weren't in control. A beat. We just thought we were." That was the second collapse. Not systems. Not defenses. Identity. Vale's voice dropped. "You're all forgetting your purpose." The officer hesitated. Then replied, almost gently. "Or we're remembering we had one before orders replaced it." Vale finally turned fully toward her. "You've done something dangerous," he said. She looked at him evenly. "I know. You've destabilized a Union-controlled asset. I know. You've encouraged insubordination on a strategic station. I know." His voice sharpened. "Then you understand what comes next." Silence. She nodded once. "Yes." Then she added. "And you still don't understand what came before." That stopped him. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed his face. She took a step closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. "On Earth," she said quietly, "we don't survive because we're the strongest." A pause. "We survive because we remember what happens when we forget people are people." Vale's hand drifted slightly toward the emergency command override. A last option. A hard reset. A purge protocol. The kind of decision that erased problems by removing everything around them. Including the problem. She noticed. Of course she did. "You could still do it," she said calmly. Vale froze. She continued. "You could purge the station. Kill everyone who disagrees. Reassert control through force." A faint pause. "But you'd have to decide something first." Vale's voice was low. "And what is that?" She met his eyes. "Whether you're afraid of losing control." That word again. Fear. Not of her. Not of humans. Of lack of obedience. Vale's fingers hovered. And for the first time in his career, he hesitated. Not because of strategy. Because of consequence. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, he could already see the reports. Union inquiry. Political fallout. The question that would follow him. Why did your station stop obeying you? And the answer he didn't want to say. Because it stopped believing I deserved to be obeyed. Behind him, systems began to stabilize. Not because he commanded it. Because no one was fighting them anymore. The station wasn't in rebellion. It was in equilibrium. A new one. Unapproved. Unwritten. Vale exhaled slowly. "You've turned my command into a negotiation," he said. She nodded. "Yes." A pause. "That's what it should have been." Silence stretched. Long enough that even alarms forgot to sound. Then Vale asked the question that had been building since the first broken baton. Why? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet. Because it had always been personal. Because they hurt my friend. A beat. And because nobody stopped them. That was all. No grand ideology. No conquest speech. No galactic ambition. Just consequence. Vale looked at the room. At his officers. At his systems. At his authority, now reduced to something closer to influence than command. Then back at her. You realize what this means? He said. She nodded. Yes. He narrowed his eyes. You've set a precedent. A faint, almost tired expression crossed her face. I know. And the Union will respond. I know. And more of your kind will come. That made her pause. Just slightly. Then she said, Good. Vale studied her. You're not afraid? She thought about it. Then answered honestly. On Earth, we had a saying. A pause. You don't fear storms. You learn where not to build fragile things. She turned slightly toward the people behind her. The freed crew. The ones no longer pretending. Then back at Vale. And you built a lot of fragile things. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vale slowly lowered his hand from the override console. Not surrender. Not victory. Something more complicated. Recognition. He spoke quietly. You've changed the station. She corrected him one last time. No. A pause. I reminded it what it was doing. Later, long after the transmission blackout ended and Union auditors arrived, they would find Viral Station intact. Operational. Stable. But fundamentally different. Security protocols rewritten. Command hierarchies flattened. Incident logs reclassified under a new category. Unexpected human behavior, systemic realignment event. And in every report, one recurring note. Subject 774B did not destroy the system. She made it stop lying. No one ever found the Deathworld girl immediately afterward. Some said she was reassigned. Some said she was never officially there to begin with. Some said she walked out through a maintenance airlock and simply stopped being tracked. But in the outer rim stations that followed, something changed. Guards hesitated before striking. Commanders asked questions before issuing orders. And somewhere in the back of every system, quietly embedded in code no one admitted to writing, a new line existed. Do not assume compliance. Verify humanity first. Because after Viral Station, no one was quite sure who the weapons were anymore. Or who had been training whom. And